My girlfriend admitted she'd been secretly recording our arguments for 6 months and forwarding them to my boss. And I sat down, poured myself a glass of water, and took one long sip. 3 weeks later, I watched her read the email she'd sent to destroy me out loud to the people she trusted most. Her name was Dana. We met at a work happy hour, one of those forced corporate things where everyone's holding a drink they don't really want and talking about things they don't really care about. She was standing near the snack table, making fun of the sad little cheese cubes under her breath, and I laughed. Genuinely laughed. That was it. That was the whole origin story of the worst 2 years of my life. I'm not going to pretend it was terrible from the start. That would be a lie, and honestly, the reason this whole thing hurt as much as it did is because the beginning was actually good. Like, genuinely good. She was sharp and funny and knew how to make a whole room feel like it was just the two of you. We used to cook terrible meals together on Sunday nights, really bad. Like, we forgot to add salt to anything and somehow also burnt the pasta. Bad. And we'd eat it anyway and laugh about it. She'd fall asleep on my shoulder watching movies. She said she hated but always finished. I was happy. Past me was such an idiot. The red flags were there. I'm just going to say that now. They were there. I saw them. I explained them away. Classic stuff. The first one was small. Maybe 4 months in. I'd gotten a decent performance review at work, not a promotion. Just a hey, you're doing well. Keep it up kind of thing. And I came home excited and told her about it. She smiled, said congratulations, and then, like 30 seconds later, said, don't get too comfortable. They do that to everyone before they let them go. I remember thinking that was weird. I filed it away and forgot about it. The second flag came around month 7. I was out with my coworker Marcus for lunch. Just Marcus, just tacos. Completely normal. And when I got home, she was quiet in this particular way she had. Not upset quiet. Calculating quiet. She asked who I'd been with. I told her. She nodded slowly and said, you could have invited me. I reminded her she was at work. She said, I could have made it work, and then she dropped it. Completely. Which, I now know, meant she'd stored it. That was her thing. Dana didn't fight in real time. She collected. She built a file. She stockpiled grievances like some kind of emotional weapons cache. And then, when she decided the moment was right, she deployed everything at once. I didn't know that yet. I just thought she was a little intense sometimes. We moved in together at the 1-year mark. Her idea, but I was on board. Our apartment was small and loud, and the upstairs neighbor apparently only existed to rearrange furniture at 11 p.m., but it was ours, and it felt good. We had routines. She made coffee in the morning. I handled groceries. She picked the shows. I picked the restaurants. Normal stuff. Comfortable stuff. The arguments started small, the way they always do. First, it was me not communicating enough. Then it was me always prioritizing work. Then it became a rotating cast of complaints that felt vaguely connected to each other, but never quite specific enough for me to address directly. Every time I tried to have an actual conversation about what was wrong, it would spiral into something else, and I'd end up apologizing for things I wasn't sure I'd done, just to make the room feel breathable again. I know how that sounds. I know. The job itself was going well, which, looking back, is probably what made me such an easy target. I was a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm. I'd been there 3 years, had a good relationship with my manager Claire, was on track for a senior role. I cared about that job. I'd worked hard for it. It was the one part of my life that felt stable and mine and moving in a direction. Dana knew that. The big fight, the one that started everything, happened on a Tuesday in March. I want to be clear about something. I was not perfect in this fight. I said things that weren't kind. I was frustrated and tired, and I raised my voice. I'm not the hero of the argument portion of this story. But here's what the fight was about. She had gone through my phone, not found it unlocked and glanced. Gone through. Scrolled back months through my messages with Marcus, with my sister, with Claire, my manager, and decided that a message I'd sent Claire that said, yeah, dinner Thursday works, I'll book somewhere, was evidence of an affair. It was a work dinner. There were 8 people there. I had the receipt. I showed her the receipt. She said I could have gotten that anywhere. I nearly choked. I said that was insane. She said I was always making her feel crazy. I said going through someone's phone without asking isn't something I'd done to her, ever, not once. She said that was because I was better at hiding things. You guys, I was exhausted. I said some things I shouldn't have. We screamed at each other for 2 hours in our small apartment while the upstairs neighbor, God bless him, chose that specific evening to apparently rebuild an entire wardrobe. I slept on the couch. She slept in the bedroom. In the morning, she acted like nothing had happened, made coffee, handed me a mug, and said, "You should apologize to me." I didn't. For once, I didn't. And 3 days later, I got called into my manager Claire's office. She looked uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen before. Claire was unflappable, 15 years in the industry, seen everything, rattled by nothing. But sitting behind her desk that afternoon, she looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. She said she'd received some recordings, audio files, of what sounded like me at home, saying, and she started reading from a printed sheet, that this company is full of idiots, that I was carrying everyone else's deadweight, and that Claire herself was completely out of her depth. I felt the floor tilt. I said that, I told her, in a fight, in my apartment. I didn't mean. Claire put her hand up. I know context exists, she said quietly, but HR has been notified. I don't have a choice. She put a paper on the desk. 2 weeks severance. Effective immediately. I walked out of that building carrying a small cardboard box with my desk plant, my charger, and a mug that said, "World's okayest employee," that Marcus had given me as a joke, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes not moving. Then I drove home. Dana was at work. The apartment was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, still holding the cardboard box, and I didn't know yet that she'd done it on purpose. I thought it was a leak. I thought maybe she'd been venting to someone and a recording had gotten out somehow. I thought a lot of things that were generous and wrong. I made myself a sandwich. I sat there. I ate it. Then she came home. She dropped her bag, saw me sitting there in the middle of the afternoon, saw the box, and said, "Oh, so you got fired." Not "what happened?" Not "are you okay?" Not even fake concern. "So you got fired." I looked at her. "Yeah," I said. "Apparently someone sent recordings of our private fights to my boss." And she looked at me, not guilty, not caught, not even particularly bothered, and said, "I've been recording our arguments and sending them to your boss. You deserve to get fired. I need you to understand the specific texture of that moment. Not the words, the tone, the way she said it, the way you'd say, 'I picked up milk on the way home,' completely flat. Like it was a reasonable thing a person might do. Like it was proportionate. Like it was something she was, honestly, a little proud of." I set down my sandwich. I said, "You did what?" And she said, and I want you to notice she uses this phrase twice in this story because the second time is my favorite. "You always make me feel like I'm overreacting." This was just me protecting myself. I looked at her for a long time. Then I got up, went to the bedroom, and closed the door. I heard her say, from the living room, "See, this is exactly the problem. You just shut down." And I lay on the bed, stared at the ceiling, and I made myself think very, very clearly. I did not explode. I did not call a lawyer. I did not immediately start plotting. I want to be honest about what I actually did, which is, I cried. Alone, on the bed, quietly, for about 45 minutes, until I ran out of it. Then I called Marcus. Marcus had been my best friend since our second week at the company, which is when we discovered we'd both independently ranked the same 3 menu items at the office catering as suspiciously beige. He answered on the second ring. I told him what happened. All of it. There was a long silence. "Okay," he said. "I need to tell you something. Here's the thing about Marcus. He'd met Dana twice. Once at the work happy hour when she and I had just started dating, and once at a company picnic 6 months later. Both times he'd been perfectly friendly and said nothing to me afterward except that she seemed very focused. I'd thought he just meant she was intense. Now he told me what very focused had actually meant. At the company picnic, Dana had pulled Marcus aside while I was getting food. She'd asked him, apparently just casually, conversationally, whether Claire ever talked about me, whether I had any issues at work, whether anyone had any complaints. Marcus had told her I was doing great, figured it was just girlfriend being supportive energy, and moved on. He hadn't told me because he didn't think it was significant. But then, he said slowly, she added the thing. "What thing?" She said. "I'm quoting this because it stuck with me." She said, "He can be really different behind closed doors. I worry about how he talks about people here." I sat up on the bed. She had been laying groundwork for 6 months. She'd planted a seed with my coworker, almost certainly said something similar to others, and then sent carefully selected recordings to my manager to trigger exactly the result she wanted. This wasn't a reaction. This was a plan. I asked Marcus if he'd be willing to write down what she'd said to him. He said yes before I finished the sentence. Also, he said, I think you should talk to Priya. Priya was Dana's best friend. They'd known each other since college, and in the time Dana and I had been together, Priya had always been quietly pleasant to me in a way that felt slightly like someone being nice to a person they've been warned about. I hadn't thought much of it until Marcus said her name. Why Priya? I said. Because, Marcus said, she called me last week, asking if you were okay, which is a weird thing to ask me about your girlfriend's boyfriend unless she knows something. I called Priya. She picked up. I could hear her breathing change when she heard my voice. She told you, Priya said. She told me. I said. A very long pause. I didn't know about the recordings, Priya said. I want you to know that. I didn't know she was actually going to do it. But you knew she was planning something. I knew she was angry, Priya said. I knew she thought you were going to leave her, and she wanted something to hold over you. Like leverage. I told her she was being insane. I thought she'd dropped it. Another pause. I didn't know she'd actually sent them. I asked Priya the question I needed the answer to. Did Dana record every argument, or specific ones? Specific, Priya said quietly. She talked about which ones. The ones where you said anything that could be taken out of context. She said. Priya stopped. Say it, I said. She said she needed a way to make sure you couldn't just leave her and be fine. She needed to make sure leaving had a cost. You guys. I sat there and felt every argument of the past 8 months reorganize itself in my brain. Every time she'd escalated things right as I was trying to wind down. Every time she'd said something designed to provoke me. Every time the fight had gotten strangely worse right when I thought we were almost done. She'd been farming them. She'd been manufacturing content. The "you always make me feel like I'm overreacting" wasn't frustration. It was a line she said knowing I'd respond defensively, knowing it would give her something usable. I thought about the work dinner receipt, the accusations about Marcus, all of it. She hadn't believed any of it. She'd been building a file. I told Priya I wasn't angry at her. I meant it mostly. She was crying a little by the end of the call, and I could tell she was genuinely gutted about her part in it. Not as gutted as I needed her to be, but enough to matter. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to fix this, I said. And then I'm going to leave. I hung up and sat in the quiet apartment for a few minutes. Dana was in the living room watching something on TV like nothing had happened. The sound of her show drifted under the door. Petty? Maybe. What happened next? Absolutely. Here's the thing about being a project coordinator for 3 years. I am very good at documentation. I am very good at building a clear, organized, time-stamped record of events. I am very good at presenting information in a format that is impossible to dismiss. I opened my laptop and I got to work. I had a folder on my computer, not for anything nefarious, just old habit, where I'd kept emails and messages from Dana. Screenshots of the conversations where she'd said things that upset me that I'd never sent to anyone, just saved because they made me feel less crazy when I reread them. Small documentation of a person who routinely told me my memory was wrong. I scrolled through 2 years of messages. I found the patterns. I made a document. Then I called Claire. Claire picked up on the 3rd ring, and I could tell she wasn't expecting to hear from me. I told her I knew who had sent the recordings and why. I told her about the picnic conversation with Marcus. I asked if she'd be willing to hear me out. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Come in tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. Bring everything." I didn't sleep much. I lay in the dark next to Dana, who was sleeping perfectly fine, and I looked at the ceiling and I thought, she thinks she won. Good. The meeting with Claire lasted 2 hours. I brought the document. I brought Marcus's written account of the picnic conversation. I brought the screenshots. Not of anything embarrassing, just the pattern of escalation, the timestamps that showed how arguments mysteriously got worse right as they were winding down, the context for the specific phrases she'd sent. I brought the work dinner receipt. Claire read everything twice. Then she called HR. Here's what I want to say about Claire. She is genuinely good at her job. She'd had to let me go based on what she was given. And that was a terrible position to be put in. And when she saw the full picture, she was angry in a way that was very quiet and very effective. HR, it turned out, had some real concerns. Using someone's private home conversations, obtained covertly, to influence employment outcomes, especially conversations specifically manufactured to sound damaging, was not a straightforward situation. There were words like bad faith reporting and potential liability in that room, and none of them were about me. By noon, I had my job back. I sat in the parking lot afterward and let myself have a moment. Just a small one. I bought myself a coffee from the place across the street, a $7 lavender latte, which past me would have called unnecessarily fancy, and present me had completely earned, and I drank it slowly in my car. Then I went home to pack. Dana wasn't there. She was at work. I took the things that were mine, which, it turned out, was not that much. I'd been living so intertwined with her space that most of the apartment felt neutral, which told me something. I took my clothes, my books, my sad little desk plant which had somehow survived being carried out of my office in a box, and my laptop. I left her key on the counter. Then I did the part I'm most proud of, and also the pettiest. I had been invited, 6 weeks earlier, to Dana's sister's engagement party. Jenna, Dana's younger sister, was genuinely sweet, and she and her fiancé had asked both of us to come and help celebrate. I hadn't canceled. Dana had not mentioned canceling. The party was that Saturday. I thought about not going. I thought about just being done. Then I thought about Dana at that party, telling her version of the story to her family, the version where she was protecting herself from a terrible boyfriend who said awful things about everyone he worked with, who she'd had to report for everyone's safety. I thought about her saying he always made me feel like I was overreacting. To her mother, her sister, her aunts. People who would nod and say what a difficult situation, how brave of you. And I thought, no, I wore the blue shirt. The one Dana had told me, 6 months ago, looked a little juvenile, and that I should retire. I kept it anyway because I liked it, and I have the spine of a man who will simply continue wearing shirts he likes. I looked good. I kid you not. The party was at Jenna's in-laws' house, a backyard thing, string lights and catering, and a very enthusiastic playlist. I arrived before Dana. Jenna saw me, lit up, hugged me, said she was so glad I could make it. I told her congratulations and gave her the card and the gift, a cooking class, because she'd mentioned once that she and her fiancé wanted to learn to make pasta from scratch, and sometimes paying attention is its own kind of revenge. Dana arrived 20 minutes later. I was standing with Marcus, who had, bless him, also been invited, and Priya, who was there as Dana's +1 situation and had spent the last 5 minutes looking like she was anticipating something uncomfortable, which she was. Dana walked into the backyard, saw me, and stopped walking. I smiled, raised my glass. Completely normal. She walked over immediately, pulled me slightly to the side. What are you doing here? Jenna invited me. I said, same as you. We broke up. You announced we broke up, I said. To me. In our apartment. 3 days ago. And then went to watch TV. We didn't really have a conversation about the engagement party. She stared at me. You need to leave. I don't think I do, I said pleasantly. But we should probably talk to everyone at some point tonight, right? Let them know what's been happening. She went very still. This is the thing about people who operate through private manipulation. They are completely unprepared for public accountability. Dana had never anticipated I'd be here. She'd spent 3 days constructing a narrative for her family, and I had just walked into the middle of it wearing the blue shirt she hated. The conversation happened around the catering table, which I did not plan but could not have scripted better. Jenna's mom, Linda, 60 years old, the kind of woman who asks you very direct questions and genuinely listens to the answers, had been talking to Dana and Dana's mother when she saw me and waved me over. We were just talking about you, she said warmly. Dana mentioned things have been difficult at work, and that was the moment. Dana was standing right there, looking at me. Her jaw was slightly tight. I said, it's been a week, that's for sure. I actually just got my job back this morning. I said it completely calmly. My manager looked into the situation more closely. Dana's mother looked confused. Your job back? What happened? That's actually an interesting story, I said. And then I looked at Dana. And here's the thing. I didn't do the big speech. I didn't lay it all out. I didn't humiliate her in front of everyone the way a lesser, more dramatic version of me had spent 3 days fantasizing about. I just said, Dana, do you want to explain? Or should I? And the silence that followed. The 4 seconds where everyone was looking at her, and she was looking at me, and she realized she had no script for this. That was the moment. That was everything. She said, "You always make me feel like I'm overreacting." Out loud. To her mother. To Linda. To Priya, who closed her eyes for a second. Her mother said, slowly, "What does that mean?" And Dana, pressured, cornered, furious that the narrative had escaped her control, started talking, trying to explain. And every explanation made it worse. She mentioned the recordings like they were a normal thing to have done. She said I'd said terrible things about my own coworkers, without mentioning that she'd provoked the arguments specifically to get that content. She said she'd had no choice. Linda looked at Dana's mother. Dana's mother looked at her hands. Jenna, who had drifted over, said quietly, "Dana, you recorded him? And sent it to his work. He deserved it," Dana said. And her voice had gone thin and high in a way I'd never heard before. Priya said, from 3 feet away, "You told me you dropped it." Dana looked at Priya like she'd been slapped. I put down my glass. "I'm going to let you all talk," I said. "Jenna, congratulations again. The party is beautiful." I hugged her. I meant it. She hugged me back hard and whispered, "I'm sorry." And I said, "It's not your fault." And I walked out of that backyard. Behind me, I could hear Dana saying, "You don't understand the full picture," and her mother's voice going very quiet and even, the way mothers' voices do when they're not angry yet, but they're getting there. I got in my car, sat in the quiet, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom. The next 72 hours were, from a messaging standpoint, chaotic. Dana called 17 times the night of the party. I let all of them go. She left 4 voicemails. I know, because my phone helpfully transcribed them. That went, in order, furious, pleading, furious again, and then something that just said, "This isn't over," which, as closing statements go, lacked the punch she was probably going for. She sent a very long text, then another, then a shorter one that just said, "Wow." I do not know what the wow was about. I chose not to ask. The social media situation was something I could not have predicted and honestly tried not to enjoy too much. I did not fully succeed in not enjoying it. She posted something vague about toxic relationships and knowing your worth, which would have landed better if Priya hadn't, at roughly the same time, quietly posted a story that just said, "Let's be clear about who was recording who." It was up for 24 hours and then deleted, but by then the people who needed to see it had seen it. Dana's sister Jenna texted me the following Monday. It was a long text. The summary is, her mother had a very serious conversation with Dana that weekend. Dana's father, who I'd met twice and liked immediately because he was the kind of person who spoke in complete sentences and looked at you when you talked, had been quietly appalled. Jenna said she wasn't asking me to do anything or feel anything. She just wanted me to know that her family didn't think I was the person Dana had described. I sat with that text for a while. It mattered more than I expected it to. Marcus came over that Tuesday with 2 pints of ice cream, 1 cookie dough, 1 mint chip, because he is a man who covers options, and we watched 3 hours of extremely stupid television, and I did not talk about Dana once, and it was exactly what I needed. I was back at work by Wednesday. My desk plant went back on my desk. Claire stopped by, didn't say anything, just nodded once in a way that contained an entire conversation. Marcus had gotten me a new mug. This one said, "World's Above Average Employee." I put it next to the old one. Here is what I want to tell you about the weeks that followed, because I've seen enough of these stories to know the ending people want, the perfect resolution, the total healing, the complete victory lap. I don't have that. I had a week where I was fine, genuinely fine, and then I had a day where I was standing in a grocery store looking at the Ben and Jerry's section, and I just stopped for a solid 2 minutes. Because we used to buy the cookie dough flavor and watch bad movies on Sunday nights, and it had been so normal and ordinary, and I'd been happy in it, or I thought I had, and it's complicated to grieve a thing that also hurt you. I bought the cookie dough anyway. I ate it alone. I cried a little. It was fine. It was actually fine. The job situation resolved better than I'd expected. The HR investigation, yes, there was one, into Dana's actions, since she'd used covertly recorded private conversations to interfere with an employment relationship, concluded without anything dramatic, but it concluded in a way that required her company to be notified. I don't know the full outcome and honestly didn't push to find out. It was enough. I moved into a new apartment in April. It's smaller than the old one and the light in the kitchen is better and there's no upstairs neighbor Who moves furniture at night? I have a plant on the windowsill. Not the work plant, a new one. A big leafy monster of a thing that I'm slightly afraid of, and on Sunday mornings. I make terrible coffee and sit in the good light and exist in a space that is just mine. Priya texted me once, a few weeks later, to check in. I told her I was okay. I asked if she was. She said she was processing some things about who she thought her friend was, and I understood that. It's a particular kind of grief. When a person you love reveals themselves to have been a different shape than you thought. I told her I was sorry she was going through it. I meant it. I haven't talked to Dana. I don't plan to. Here's the thing no one tells you about this kind of ending. You don't feel victorious. You feel tired in a way that's clean, like after a long run. You feel the specific relief of a room that was always slightly too cold, finally warming up. You feel, slowly, like the version of yourself who existed before someone spent 2 years subtly convincing you that your instincts were wrong. Your reactions were too much. Your memory was faulty. You feel that version start to come back. In small pieces, a little bit at a time. I wore the blue shirt to work last week. Someone in the elevator told me it looked great. I said thank you, and I meant it, and I moved on. Past me was an idiot who missed a lot of signs. Present me is sitting in a good apartment with a big, scary plant and a Monday morning and the full use of my own perception. She wanted leaving to have a cost. It did, just not for me.